This is really an example, a good example of a bad practice. Hi, my name is Tom Haak of the HR Trend Institute. Today a small video in the series of HR bad practices. And I'm going to gather a lot of bad practices in this series. Yesterday I spoke to a friend and he had been interviewed for a job. I said, how did it go? He said, terrible. And he described how it went. He was interviewed for this interview, I think at the municipality in the Netherlands. And there had been 2 panels. He was interviewed by 2 panels. 2 panels of 4 people working in the department where the job was. And in one of those panels was also the boss. And he described it as 2 times grilling. They didn't care at all whether he was whether they had to motivate him for the job. It was all about, hey, what about this? And we see this. And do you really think of why does someone with a background like you apply for a job here? And of course there's always the boss pleaser in that panel, who really wants to show that he or she is also super capable. Well, the candidate, my friend, knew in about, you could say 30 minutes, maybe even less, that this was not a job for him, and he waved the people goodbye after the interview. And well, the question is, do they ever find a suitable candidate if they have a process like this? This is really an example, a good example of a bad practice. The unstructured interview is already a bad practice. It's high on my list. Many companies still use the unstructured interview as their main selection method. Bad practice. But on top of that, even worse is the unstructured panel interview. And maybe even worse is the unstructured panels interview, like my friend experienced. Don't interview people unstructured, and don't interview people in panels. Panels create immediately a kind of unfair situation, unequal situation. 4 people, 3 people, 2 people, whatever the size of the panel, against one. Because often also those people are behind a table with their papers and looking important. So it's inequality. A panel interview is often more difficult to get any structure in that. People have follow-up questions, have other questions, and want to put in their point. And people in a panel interview influence each other. There's no independent opinion. In the end, the people are all there, they influence each other, so you don't create independent opinion. So, and there are probably more reasons, because it's also a good reason also that it demotivates candidates if they are interviewed by a panel. What are my recommendations? And it could be a long list, but recommendation 1 is, don't rely too much on the interview. If it's structured or unstructured, in the end it does not matter. The interview is not a very reliable selection instrument. But if you want to use it in combination with other reliable instruments, test, assessment center, etc., etc. And of course, before that, you should know what you are looking for. What are the relevant criteria to check the candidate on? Often that's also not the case. Often there is no real evidence that the criteria are the really important and qualifying criteria, but that's for another discussion. No interview, but if you want to do an interview, do it structured. Structured, it means look at the relevant criteria, distill questions out of those criteria. We all know the STAR method and competency-based interview. Use those methods. So do interview alone, so structured, alone, and then ask the people who interview to record their findings on paper or on their computer, but say, okay, I asked question number 1 because that was on my list, that was in my structure, and here is I score this candidate A, B, C, D, or 1 to 10, and here is the evidence. This is why I score a 5 or a 6 or a 7. So ask people to put it down on paper, because then other people can look at those paper and they can check whether they can follow the scoring. Because often when you only look at the paper, you don't see the candidate, you're less biased. Yeah? And then later on, if you have a couple of structured interviews, you can put the results together and then create a common opinion, or let someone else create a common opinion. Lots more to say, but this is a bad practice. Panel interviews, worse, unstructured panel interviews. Don't do that. And if you want good candidates, it's also a practice that you don't do justice to yourself. If you want more, not more bad practices, they will come, but if you want more good practices, if you want to learn more about trends, go to the website of the HR Trend Institute, hrtrendinstitute.com. Follow this YouTube channel, subscribe, follow me on LinkedIn, connect to me on LinkedIn, and I hope to see you soon. Bye bye.